Good afternoon. I'm Fred Patrick, Director of the Vera's Center on Sentencing and Corrections. We're pleased to welcome you here today. I want to thank all of you for joining us here, both here in New York City at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, in Connecticut at the Cheshire Correctional Institution, and for those who are joining us live via live stream. I should add that the TRUE unit, which is where we will focus on today in Connecticut, stands for truthfulness to oneself and others, respectfulness towards the community, understanding ourselves and what brought us here, and elevating into success. What do you think of that? How about TRUE? Let's give them a hand. I want you to know that we're doing something pretty technologically complex today in order to ensure that the members of TRUE, the staff and residents there, are able to fully and actively participate in this. And so if there's an occasional disruption or technical glitch, please bear with us. So some of you have asked why Reimagine and why Reimagine now? Americans are being newly asked to reckon with the truth of our nation's past, including an examination of the deep roots that our current prison practices have in the country's history of legalized slavery and racial oppression. This reckoning must include a deep consideration of the purpose and use of incarceration in this country. While many express dissatisfaction with the current system in terms of its budgetary impact, extremely high recidivism rates, and lost opportunities for so many, reform efforts have generally tended to focus on reducing the flow of people into prison and jails, aka sentencing reform, as well as working to improve reentry supports for those in the community once they return home. This is certainly something we ought to do and need to do. We must, however, also evaluate our current prison practices and include a critical reexamination of the purpose and experience of incarceration. Why should we care how we treat individuals who are incarcerated? Why do we need to care? Simply stated, there are 1.5 million people behind prison bars, and that number rises to 2.2 million if you include jails. These are our brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, loved ones, cousins, nephews, nieces, co-workers, fellow students, and importantly, fellow Americans, fellow citizens and members of this broader American society, the vast majority of whom are coming home, over 600,000 people annually returning to our communities. And the cold reality is that none of the harm, damages, and collateral consequences that flow from incarceration changes that fact. Notwithstanding the TRUE unit, which you'll hear so much about today, and other examples that it has inspired in places around the country, the vast majority of jails and prisons are still characterized by endless days and weeks and months and years of idleness and isolation. Members who are incarcerated there lose their names and identities, and that's replaced by numbers and uniforms. And none of those things actually contribute to the successful return and thriving of individuals when they return to the community. And let's be clear, current conditions in America's prisons, including inadequate staffing, training, recruitment, and quality of life, are also not conducive to staff, and often leads to high stress levels, frequent turnover, and an unnecessary and inhumane us against them mentality. There's clearly a better way. Americans, we can do better, we must do better. Our Reimagining Prison report, which is being released today, presents a vision of what can come to pass should we as a nation, as a society, decide that incarceration will no longer be used as a tool for racial oppression. It presents a vision of incarceration rooted in human dignity, and the TRUE unit serves as a proof point of the very real promise and possibility of such an approach should we decide that that's what we want to do, and we muster the courage, the leadership, and commitment to do so. Many of you were with us in June 2016 in Philadelphia at the historic Eastern State Penitentiary when we launched the Reimagine Prison Project. And while today's event represents a culmination of that project, it does not, I repeat, does not represent the culmination of this movement, a movement to transform the conditions of confinement in America, a movement to transform how we treat individuals who are incarcerated. In fact, today's event and the report itself are intended to leverage the convergence of the criminal justice reform movement and then increased consciousness around racial and social injustice to shine a bright light on that very aspect of the inhumane treatment of individuals and our obligation to demand better. We aim to inspire, to encourage, to energize, to galvanize you collectively and individually to reshape the practice of imprisonment by grounded in operational and philosophical principles and practices of human dignity. To further fuel this movement, we're pleased to publicly announce today that Vera, we will be taking a 38-member delegation to Germany and Norway later this week to further examine and be inspired to act by those two systems with their focus on human dignity. What we've tried to do over the course of this project in the last 2 or so years, and with the transformation we've seen in Connecticut, is to use history to inspire us to reach beyond the familiar and the incremental. We want to be truly transformational and transformative. And we want to investigate, interrogate, research, and with Connecticut prove that a different approach to incarceration, one grounded in human dignity, is possible. We believe you will experience that yourself today here in this room, where we'll talk about our aspirations, our vision, and how we think that can be scaled. You'll go to Cheshire Prison in Connecticut, where we'll hear from those who are incarcerated and who work there in a prison that has dared to reimagine itself. One way that reimagining has actually taken place in Connecticut is through family engagement, engaging the members of those incarcerated individuals and their loved ones. And I want to extend a special thanks and a special recognition and welcome to the family members of the true residents and mentors who are joining us both live here in New York City as well as on via live stream. Let's give a hand to those individuals who've been supporting their loved ones. We also want to recognize Galaxy Gives and the Ford Foundation for their tremendous support of this event today, and for the Robert Wilson Charitable Trust Fund for its support of the Reimagining Prison Project. Can we please give a hand to those generous individuals? Let me turn to some logistics. Full bios are in your program, so you'll hear very brief introductions today so that we can efficiently and effectively get through the program that we have in store for you today. We will begin here in New York, where we'll be welcomed by Carol Mason, the president of John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and Carol will then moderate the first panel. From there, we turn to Cheshire in Connecticut, where Scott Semple, the Corrections Commissioner in Connecticut, will welcome you, and he'll introduce the panel there. We'll have a brief question and answer period following the panel there, and that Q&A will be in both locations, so those of you here will be able to ask questions there. I should add, though, due to time constraints, we'll only be able to take 2 to 3 questions from here. We then return to Connecticut, where you will hear from Michael Murphy, a famous architect, and he'll talk about his work with us around reimagining prison and the design concepts by which you can capture the humanity that we're seeking to capture. We then return to New York, where Candace Jones, the president of the Public Welfare Foundation, will lead a discussion on how do we take this idea of reimagining prison to scale. Again, there will be time for brief Q&A after that panel from both locations again. We'll then head back to the True Unit in Connecticut, where we'll be joined by students from John Jay College here who will be on site there, as well as residents in the True program, and they will dialogue in conversation with Baz Dreisinger, who's a professor here at John Jay College and the academic founder of the Prison to College Pipeline program. And now, without further ado, I introduce you to Carol Mason, president of John Jay College.
We always have a little technical issue with my height here. So good afternoon, and thanks, Fred. This is a wonderful occasion to be able to celebrate the wonderful work that Vera has done. And Fred has been a tireless educator for me in this work from my time at the Department of Justice. So good afternoon and welcome to John Jay. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. You'll hear shortly from Governor Malloy from Connecticut and Commissioner Scott Semple, who's doing this remotely. And I just remembered I'm supposed to slow down because of the transmission speed. But we've got so many criminal justice advocates and corrections officers here to celebrate this rethinking and reimagining prison in the United States. I'd also like to give a special thanks to Nick Turner and everyone at Vera Institute of Justice. John Jay treasures our partnership with Vera, and they fund some wonderful fellowship programs for us. And it's Vera's ceaseless work that is moving the needle forward on criminal justice reform. It's making us ask the difficult questions, and it's making us envision a more fair and more humane system. I was at the International Association of Chiefs of Police yesterday, and it's wonderful that we're all working outside of our silos to do this work together. And one of the most powerful moments that I've had since being president here at John Jay was attending the Prison to College Pipeline program at Otisville State Prison. Our students at Otisville, because that's what they are, our students are absolutely amazing. They are some of the best students we have, and as one of our professors said, that when she asks a question, unlike in some classes, every hand goes up. They are so anxious to learn and to be educated. And one of our recent graduates, who's now an ambassador for the Prison to College Pipeline program, just graduated, and I had the pleasure of giving Devon Simmons his diploma this year. And one of the things I want you to know about Devon is that until he went to the program at Otisville, he hadn't been in an official classroom in 13 years because he came through during that time period where we were not allowing prison education to happen. But Devon went on to graduate from Ostos College, and then he went on to graduate here at John Jay with a 3.9 grade point average. Devon was on honor roll every single semester he was in college. And he's now traveling to South Africa, England, Jamaica, and Cuba, trying to create higher education opportunities for people incarcerated across the world. And can you imagine what the world would be like if everyone who is caught up in our criminal justice system had the opportunity to be educated, to get a college degree, and investing in their future and what a better country we would be? Later in this conference, you're going to hear from Baz Dressinger, who is the woman who was responsible for creating the Prison to College pipeline here at John Jay. And I love the way that she flipped the script on what we used to hear people talking about the school to prison pipeline. No longer. It's called supportive discipline. And what we now have is making sure that anyone caught up in our criminal justice system has an opportunity to go to college. So it is my hope that after this discussion today, that I know that all of us have already signed on to this reimagining, that we're all believers in what can happen. And so the goal after today is to move from believing what's possible to making it a reality. So do I have a commitment from all of you all about that? So I am watching the clock because we've got this really timed closely with going back and forth with simulcasting. We're testing technology. So we are going to continue with a conversation on the why and how we are going to be reimagining prisons. So there's a video that will come up now while the panel gets seated.